Have you ever wondered why some women, when they pull away emotionally, seem to captivate a man's soul more intensely than when they were close? It's as if, in their distance, they weave an invisible thread that tugs at his very core, drawing him to her in a way he cannot understand. The paradox is clear. It's the space between them, the absence of overt emotion, that makes his yearning for her grow stronger, his desire for connection more consuming. Why does emotional distance create such a magnetic pull? What is it about the silence, the withdrawal, that makes a man crave a woman more than if she were constantly in his orbit? At the heart of this dynamic lies something far more profound than simple attraction. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, spoke of the unconscious, a vast, hidden world within us all, filled with repressed emotions, unacknowledged desires, and untapped potentials. It is in the depths of the unconscious where the real answer to this question lies. For a man, the woman who creates emotional distance is not simply a figure of desire. She is a mirror to his own unconscious, a force that awakens the very shadow of his psyche. Jung understood that the shadow is the part of us that we do not want to see, the parts of ourselves that we hide, repress, or deny because they are too difficult to confront. The shadow contains all that is deemed unacceptable or undesirable by the ego. And yet, it is through the projection of this shadow that we are often unknowingly drawn to others. For the man, the emotionally distant woman is not just an object of desire. She becomes the embodiment of his unconscious needs and unspoken fears, the parts of himself that remain out of sight, out of reach. And it is this very mystery that keeps him hooked, keeps him wanting more. When a woman is emotionally distant, she is not simply withholding her affection. She is challenging his ego in a way that most men are not prepared for. In his attempt to control, to possess, to win her affection, he is unknowingly engaging in a battle with his own shadow. Every moment she pulls away, every moment she becomes emotionally unavailable, he is forced to confront the deepest parts of himself, the parts he has long suppressed and refused to acknowledge. And in this confrontation, he is made to question his own worth, his own value, and his very sense of self. Jung's concept of individuation, the process by which one integrates the unconscious with the conscious mind, is deeply tied to this dynamic. When a man faces emotional distance from a woman, he is presented with the opportunity to evolve. But this process is not easy. The ego, which has carefully crafted an identity based on control, possession, and validation, is shaken to its core. For in the face of her absence, he is forced to come to terms with his own vulnerabilities, his own insecurities. He realizes that the things he thought would make him feel whole, his achievements, his status, his ability to manipulate or control, are not enough to fill the empty space she has left behind. The more she pulls away, the more he is drawn into the depths of his own psyche. The distance between them becomes the space for his shadow to rise, to demand attention. The emotions he has long ignored, the fear of abandonment, the insecurity of not being enough, the anxiety that he will never truly be loved, come rushing to the surface. These feelings are not new, but they have been buried beneath the surface of his consciousness, tucked away in the dark corners of his psyche, waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. It is in this confrontation with the shadow that he begins to understand the deeper layers of attraction. For the man who is constantly pursuing the emotionally distant woman, the attraction is not just about desire. It is about the longing for wholeness. She represents the very thing he cannot reach, the thing that will complete him, yet always remains just out of his grasp. In her absence, he is forced to seek that completeness within himself, to look inward and explore the parts of himself that he has ignored. This is where the power of emotional distance lies. It forces him to confront himself, to wrestle with his own inner demons, and in doing so, he begins the process of individuation. This psychological process is not without pain. The ego is resistant to change, and the shadow does not reveal itself willingly. But the woman who creates emotional distance acts as the catalyst for this transformation. She does not force him to change. Rather, she simply exists as she is, emotionally detached, independent, unyielding. Her emotional distance becomes the mirror through which he must confront his deepest fears and insecurities, And it is in this confrontation that he begins to evolve. He is no longer defined solely by his ego, his need for validation, or his desire for control. He is now faced with the deeper truths of his own soul, truths that have been hidden for far too long. The emotional distance that a woman creates in a man's life is not an act of cruelty or indifference. Rather, it is a form of empowerment, both for the woman and for the man. It forces the man to take responsibility for his own emotional needs, to stop relying on external sources for validation, and to begin the journey towards self-actualization. In this space, the woman who holds emotional distance becomes the embodiment of feminine power, a power that is not about dominance or control, but about self-sufficiency, autonomy, and emotional freedom. As the man experiences the emotional distance, something begins to shift within him. The distance between them, far from driving him away, draws him deeper into the labyrinth of his own desires. This distance is like a void, but it's not an emptiness. It is a space brimming with unspoken meaning, with latent possibilities that beg to be uncovered. It's a space that forces him to question everything about himself, to rethink his approach to relationships, to love, and, most importantly, to his own self-worth. For men, emotional distance from a woman stirs something primal, a hunger that no external validation can satisfy. The more she withdraws, the more he is led into a state of emotional hunger, a longing that becomes a reflection of his own unmet needs. He finds himself obsessing over her silence, her absence, the lack of her presence, and the more he chases that absence, the more he is left with only his own inner contradictions. His ego is at war with his unconscious, as part of him seeks the validation that he believes she holds, while another part understands on a deeper level that the need to chase her is, in itself, a sign of his own vulnerability. This struggle can only be understood through Jungian theory, in particular, through the concept of projection. Projection occurs when a person attributes their own unconscious thoughts, feelings, or desires onto someone else. For the man who craves the emotionally distant woman, he is projecting his deepest, most unacknowledged needs onto her. He is not just chasing her. He is chasing the projection of his own desires and fantasies, desires that he has buried beneath layers of self-control and societal expectations. But in the process of projection, he creates a bond with her that exists only in the realm of his mind. She becomes not who she truly is, but who he wishes her to be, a symbol of the ideal of something that can complete him. Jung would argue that it is in this projection that the man is forced to confront his own shadow. The woman, by her emotional distance, serves as a mirror, reflecting the parts of him that he has long repressed, the parts of himself that long to be acknowledged, that crave emotional connection, but also the parts that fear it. His desire for her is not just a longing for a woman. It is a longing for wholeness. And when he faces the discomfort of that distance, he is forced to reckon with the parts of himself that he has kept hidden in the dark corners of his psyche. As the man finds himself lost in this emotional dance, he begins to encounter a profound truth, one that many will resist until they are faced with it directly. He cannot fill the void he feels with external validation, with the chase, or with any external relationship. The void he is experiencing is not the absence of the woman. It is the absence of integration. He is fragmented, torn between his need for connection and his fear of vulnerability, between his conscious ego and his unconscious desires. The woman's emotional distance, instead of driving him away, forces him to face this fragmentation, this split between what he presents to the world and what he truly desires at a soul-deep level. And in this space of emotional distance, he begins to experience something crucial, the recognition that self-worth cannot be anchored in others. In Jungian terms, it is the process of individuation that begins. Individuation is the journey of becoming whole, of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of oneself, of learning to live in harmony with both the light and the dark within. The emotionally distant woman, in her withdrawal, creates the perfect environment for him to begin this journey. She is not the source of his pain. She is the catalyst for his growth, for his transformation. What many men fail to realize is that their yearning for the woman's affection, their obsession with her emotional distance, is a reflection of their own need for emotional autonomy. They want to be validated by her, but what they really need is to validate themselves. They need to acknowledge the parts of themselves that have been neglected, to reclaim their own sense of self-worth independent of her. The more they chase her, the further they move away from this realization. But when they finally surrender the need for her validation, when they embrace the emotional space she has created, they begin the painful but ultimately liberating process of self-discovery. In this moment, the woman who has been emotionally distant no longer holds power over him in the same way. The game of chase ends. She no longer remains the unattainable object of obsession, but becomes a mirror of his own journey towards self-sufficiency. He no longer needs her approval to feel whole, because he has learned to find that wholeness within himself. His craving for her shifts from a desperate need to a conscious choice. And this is where the deepest form of attraction begins. Not the attraction of the ego, not the need to possess or control, but the attraction of two whole beings coming together, each confident in their own worth, each secure in their own identity. This, then, is the true power of emotional distance. It is not about making a man crave you for the sake of control or manipulation. It is about creating the space for him to confront himself, to see his own shadow, and to come into alignment with his own deeper truths. The emotionally distant woman does not need to chase. She simply needs to be. And it is in this space of emotional autonomy that the man begins to realize that he does not need her to complete him, but in choosing her, he chooses to share his wholeness with hers. As the emotional distance continues to shape the dynamic between the man and the woman, the depth of his craving begins to transform. No longer is it the shallow pursuit of external validation, nor the attempt to conquer an unreachable object. It shifts into something far more profound, the desire to reconcile with the parts of himself he's long ignored. The emotional space she has created has become the soil in which his growth begins to take root. This journey into self-awareness is not a comfortable one. Jung understood that true self-realization, or individuation, is often accompanied by pain, resistance, and turmoil. The man who once sought external validation through the approval of others, through the affection of a woman, must now learn to seek that validation within himself. The absence of the woman forces him to confront the emptiness he feels within. It is a harsh but necessary confrontation with his own shadow, that deep part of his psyche that he has long denied. And it is in this space of emotional distance that the man is given the opportunity to look inward and heal. The woman, in her emotional detachment, becomes the archetype of the feminine principle that men must face to truly grow. She embodies what Jung referred to as the anima, the unconscious feminine aspects within every man. The anima is the bridge between a man's ego and his deeper unconscious self. It represents the qualities of intuition, emotion, and receptivity, qualities that men, especially those consumed by their own egos, may struggle to access. The emotionally distant woman, in her withdrawal, represents the unattainable anima that forces a man to confront the parts of his psyche he has neglected. She is the muse that compels him to reconcile the fragmented parts of his soul. The more she distances herself, the more he is driven to confront the absence within himself. The space between them becomes a battleground for the soul. In this battleground, the ego fights desperately to maintain control, to regain the validation that was once dependent on her affection. But the more he chases, the more the truth of his own vulnerability is laid bare. What is it about his own identity that is so fragile? Why does he need her validation to feel whole? These questions, once buried beneath the surface, begin to rise and demand attention. And as he contemplates these questions, he begins to shift. He begins to realize that the emotional distance is not a rejection of him, but a reflection of his own need for emotional independence. He starts to see that in his quest for external validation, he has neglected his own emotional autonomy. The woman who withdraws does not reject him. She invites him to face the truths he has long avoided. She is not merely the object of his desire, but the key to his transformation. Jung's concept of the shadow is crucial here. The shadow represents the aspects of ourselves that we have repressed or rejected, the parts of our psyche that we refuse to acknowledge because they are too painful, too uncomfortable, or too vulnerable. The shadow often manifests in relationships as projections. We project our fears, insecurities, and unacknowledged desires onto others, particularly onto those who embody the qualities we have disowned. The emotionally distant woman is the mirror of his shadow. She reflects back to him the parts of himself that he has long denied, forcing him to face the darker aspects of his psyche. As the man continues to chase her, he unknowingly chases the shadow within himself, the unresolved parts of his psyche that long for integration. It is through this chase that he is given the opportunity to recognize these hidden aspects, to bring them into the light, and to begin the difficult but necessary work of integrating them into his conscious self. The woman, in her emotional distance, does not push him away. She leads him inward. She becomes the vehicle through which he can confront his own fears, insecurities, and repressed desires. This, however, is not a journey that can be completed by merely winning her affection or gaining her approval. The true transformation lies in the man's ability to recognize that his worth is not dependent on her or any external source. His craving for her, this deep, gnawing hunger, is really a craving for wholeness, for self-integration. He must learn that the key to his emotional fulfillment lies not in her validation, but in his ability to validate himself. The more she pulls away, the more he is given the chance to discover that wholeness within. It is in this space of emotional distance that he is forced to come to terms with his own power and worth. He no longer needs to seek validation from her or from anyone else. His emotional distance from her becomes the very space where he can reclaim his own autonomy, where he can come into his own power. And this is the ultimate irony. The more a woman withdraws, the more a man craves her, but it is not for the reasons he initially believes. He is not chasing her because of what she offers him, but because of what she forces him to discover within himself. She is the catalyst for his journey toward emotional independence, and it is in this process of self-discovery that he finally begins to understand what true emotional fulfillment feels like. Not in her affection, but in his own self-sufficiency. The woman who creates emotional distance is not rejecting him. She is, in fact, inviting him to reject the need for external validation. She is pushing him to recognize his own worth, to step into the power of his own emotional autonomy. And when a man finally recognizes that, when he stops chasing after her and instead chooses to embrace his own emotional freedom, it is then that he can truly let go of the need to possess or control her. It is then that he can finally see her for who she truly is, not the object of his desire, but the reflection of his own growth. As the emotional distance deepens, a shift begins to occur within the man. No longer is he chasing after her as if she were something to possess or control. Instead, he begins to understand that the distance she creates is not a form of rejection, but a space for him to reclaim his own emotional sovereignty. He no longer seeks validation from her because he recognizes that true fulfillment cannot come from external sources. His craving, once focused entirely on her, slowly transforms into a profound desire for inner completeness. He begins to realize that what he truly longs for is not her approval, but his own self-acceptance. Jung's concept of individuation is vital here. It is the process by which a person integrates the different, often fragmented, parts of their personality into a harmonious whole. It is a journey toward becoming who we truly are, not who society or others expect us to be. When a woman creates emotional distance, she does not simply disappear from his life. She sets in motion the process by which he must become whole. Her absence, rather than leaving a void, creates a fertile space for self-exploration and personal growth. The man must look inward, into the parts of his psyche that he has ignored, repressed, or feared, and confront the parts of himself that have been hidden for far too long. The emotional distance forces him to confront the ego, that rigid, defensive structure he has built around himself to protect against vulnerability. The ego is built on validation, control, and power. But when a woman withdraws emotionally, she strips away the very foundation of the ego's power. He is no longer validated by her presence, by her affection, or by her attention. In this emotional void, the ego's defenses are no longer enough to protect him from the deeper, more profound truths about himself. He is forced to look at his own shadows, the parts of himself he has long tried to suppress or deny. The shadow is not a force to be feared, but a reflection of the unconscious, a mirror of his deepest desires, fears, and unmet emotional needs. When he faces these shadow aspects, he begins to recognize that his emotional craving for her is not about her at all. It is about his own need for emotional integration and self-awareness. And it is in this space of emotional distance that he begins to truly understand the power of the feminine. The woman who withdraws emotionally is not seeking to control or manipulate. She is simply existing in her own emotional autonomy, and it is her independence that makes her so alluring. She is not dependent on him for validation, for attention, or for love. She is not chasing after him, trying to please him, or seeking his approval. She is content in her own skin, empowered by her own sense of worth. This emotional self-sufficiency is the very essence of feminine power, and it is this power that attracts him. Her detachment, rather than creating rejection, invites him to confront his own need for validation and independence. In her emotional distance, she becomes the embodiment of the feminine archetype that every man subconsciously seeks to integrate within himself. The feminine principle represents not just emotion and intuition, but also autonomy, receptivity, and fluidity. The emotionally distant woman is a manifestation of this archetype, a reminder to the man that true fulfillment comes not from external validation, but from inner peace and self-realization. As he confronts his shadow, as he begins to acknowledge the parts of himself he has long ignored, he realizes that his desire for her is not about her at all. It is about his own need to reconcile the masculine and feminine aspects within himself, to integrate the light and shadow within his own psyche. The more he learns to accept and integrate his own emotional independence, the more he is drawn to her. Her emotional distance no longer feels like a rejection. It becomes a source of empowerment, both for him and for her. In this space, he begins to understand that true attraction is not about control or possession, but about mutual growth, mutual respect, and mutual self-awareness. It is in this journey of self-discovery that the man begins to realize the true power of the emotionally distant woman. She is not the object of his desires, nor is she the source of his suffering. She is the catalyst for his transformation, the mirror through which he sees his own reflection. As he begins to embrace his own emotional autonomy, he no longer feels the need to chase after her or to seek her approval. He no longer feels the emptiness or the longing that once consumed him. Instead, he begins to see her for who she truly is, not the object of his projection, but a woman who is just as whole, just as powerful, and just as self-sufficient as he has become. In this space, the power dynamic shifts. The emotionally distant woman is no longer the one who controls the man's desires. Rather, they come to a place of mutual respect and mutual attraction. He has transcended the need for external validation, and she, in her emotional independence, has also transcended the need to be validated by him. They are both whole, both empowered, and both emotionally free. The craving, the obsession, the desire, it all dissipates into a deeper, more profound connection, one rooted in the recognition of each other's autonomy and self-worth. The journey that the emotionally distant woman takes the man on is not one of suffering or longing, but of liberation. It is a journey of self-empowerment, of breaking free from the chains of the ego and the need for validation, and embracing the freedom of self-acceptance. When a man can let go of the need to chase, to possess, to control, he finally realizes that true emotional fulfillment does not come from another person. It comes from within. As the man journeys deeper into this process of emotional awakening, he begins to understand the profound truth that underlies the power of emotional distance. He realizes that he has spent much of his life seeking fulfillment from outside sources, from women, from status, from achievements. But in his search for external validation, he has neglected the most important source of fulfillment, himself. The emotionally distant woman, through her absence, has shown him the space where he must now look inward. She is no longer a figure of unattainable desire, but a catalyst for his own self-realization, the doorway through which he is forced to confront the parts of himself he had long ignored. This transformation is not a quick one, nor is it always smooth. There are moments of discomfort, moments when the ego's resistance rises up, fighting against the changes that are happening within. The ego, that part of the self that clings to control and certainty, resists the unknown, the mysterious. But the emotionally distant woman represents exactly that, the unknown, the mystery, the untamed feminine. And it is this very mystery that forces the man to transcend his ego, to step outside of his comfort zone, and to embrace the parts of himself that he has long suppressed. In Jungian terms, this is the process of individuation in its truest form. Individuation is the integration of the conscious and unconscious parts of the self, the coming together of the masculine and feminine energies within. The emotionally distant woman becomes the reflection of the man's own inner feminine, the anima, which Jung described as the unconscious feminine counterpart within every man. The anima is not merely the idealized image of women that men project onto others. It is the part of themselves that represents their emotional and intuitive nature, their creativity, their receptivity. By withdrawing emotionally, the woman challenges the man to confront this unconscious aspect of himself, to embrace his own vulnerability, and to finally acknowledge the feminine within. The deeper the emotional distance, the more the man is forced to question his relationship with the feminine. He begins to realize that his desire for her was not simply about her appearance, her behavior, or her presence, but about something much deeper, his unconscious yearning for integration, for wholeness. In the absence of her emotional connection, he faces the dissonance between his conscious identity and the parts of himself that have been relegated to the shadows. His desire for her becomes a longing not for her love, but for the emotional completeness that he believes she represents. But here lies the greatest revelation of all. She is not the key to his fulfillment. His fulfillment does not depend on her emotional closeness or her affection. Her absence, her emotional distance, has shown him that the key to his emotional completeness lies within himself. He has spent so long projecting his desires onto her, onto women, onto the external world, that he has neglected the inner work required to reclaim his own emotional power. The woman who creates emotional distance does not do so to manipulate or control. She does so to remain true to herself, to protect her own autonomy, and to preserve the sacredness of her emotional world. Her emotional detachment is not an act of rejection but of self-preservation. And it is in this space of detachment that the man is forced to let go of his dependency on external sources for validation and self-worth. He must learn to rely on himself, to discover the well of emotional independence that resides within. This emotional independence is what makes the woman who withdraws so irresistible, because she is a living embodiment of the very qualities that the man needs to integrate within himself. She does not seek validation from him. She does not need his approval to feel whole. Her emotional detachment is not a sign of coldness or indifference. It is a reflection of the deepest feminine power, the power of emotional self-sufficiency. And this is the power that he craves, not because he wishes to possess it, but because he realizes, through her withdrawal, that he must embody it for himself. And as he comes to this realization, something shifts within him. His craving for her no longer comes from a place of need, but from a place of choice. He no longer chases after her emotional warmth because he has learned to generate his own warmth from within. He no longer seeks her approval because he has discovered that his worth is not determined by anyone else, but by his own sense of self. The emotionally distant woman becomes a symbol, not of unattainability, but of the inner freedom he has found within himself. As this process unfolds, the man becomes more emotionally autonomous. He recognizes that his worth is not tied to anyone's affection or approval. His journey through the emotional distance has shown him that true emotional fulfillment comes from within, from integrating the light and dark, the masculine and feminine, the conscious and unconscious, within himself. The woman, in her emotional detachment, has played a vital role in this transformation, guiding him toward his own wholeness. In the end, the craving is no longer about her. It is about the growth he has experienced, the emotional independence he has cultivated, and the understanding that he is complete as he is. The woman who once seemed distant and unattainable now stands as a symbol of the transformation he has undergone. She is not the source of his fulfillment. She is the reflection of the woman he has become, emotionally whole, self-sufficient, and free. The man who has learned to navigate this emotional distance, who has found his own emotional sovereignty, no longer chases after the unattainable. He knows that true power lies in his ability to choose himself, to choose his path, and, when the time is right, to choose a partner who complements, rather than completes, him. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.